Hi there. Welcome to FinFactor. I'm your host, Blaine Bertsch, co-founder and CEO at Dry Run Financial Forecasting Software, where we help the office of the CFO leave spreadsheets behind and model everything from cash flow through to complex scenarios with clarity and control. And joining me today is Paul Barnhurst, an FP&A expert, trainer, and podcast host. Today, we'll unpack the ever-expanding responsibilities of finance and the office of the CFO as they assume an increasingly operational role. Welcome to the show, Paul.
Thanks for having me. I'm super excited to be here, Blaine. It's a real pleasure to chat with you today.
And before the show even started here, we were talking a little bit about how operations are starting to get stacked onto the CFO more and more. And you had a couple of examples of that. And I thought, yeah, it's time to record this because this is really interesting stuff. So what are you seeing in the role of the office of the CFO?
Yeah, I think, we're seeing a few things that make it clear that finance and the CFO is being asked to do more and be more operationally, commercially driven. Not that they haven't in the past, but it's just a larger role of that. And the first example is Salesforce. Recently, it would have been a month or two ago, they named a new C-level position. They called it the COFO, and it stands for Chief Operating Finance Officer. And it was the CFO kind of taking both over. So operations and finance, that's not going to work in every company, especially if you're very heavy manufacturing operations, I think. But there are other companies where it could make a lot of sense. And so that's one example where you're seeing that increase in operations. In small companies, it's becoming more and more common to see that CFO and COO title.
Mm-hmm.
You look at what people want in their data and their tools, they want to be able to see the operational data, right? It's crucial to what finance is doing. So that's kind of the first example that leads me to go, okay, we're starting to see again a little bit of an expanding role of the CFO. Not that they haven't done it in the past, but just in different ways and continuing to grow.
I'm curious because, I'll be honest with you, I have noticed that on LinkedIn more than once, and I never really clicked till you mentioned it. CFO and COO, or COO and CFO, and I just kind of interesting. Now I'm curious, what is the what do you think sort of has started that, or I guess just that it's created this pressure on businesses to kind of get the CFO just more tied into operations? Is that something to do with kind of the environment out there or technology, or what are you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I think technology plays a role. I think, the environment. I also think as we become more and more data driven, finance is really in many ways that nervous system of the company in that, especially FP&A, in that they're expected to work with everybody, kind of be that early warning signal, see what's going on. And you can't do that from just a financial perspective.
Yeah.
I cannot be a good business partner and only bring finances to the meeting. I got to understand how that relates to the operation. What are those operational metrics and KPIs? And so the best finance professionals, whether it's CFO, FP&A, whatever role it may be, also understand the operations, and they're operationally driven, but they do it through a finance lens, right? Customer support may be doing it through resource allocation and a bunch of other things. Products taking clearly that customer's view in their operations. Finance is very much an operational view, but with the financial numbers. And so I think data is clearly driving it. The environment's driving it. The fact that FP&A has become bigger and bigger, right? You look at COVID, the need for scenario planning, the need for good data. Now you have AI coming in. With AI, the idea is we'll be able to automate more of the technical. We're not there. Some's hype, some's reality. We'll see how it all plays out. But there's, it's playing a huge role, and it will continue to play a huge role. And as that happens, finance in general becomes more strategic. And the only way you can really be strategic is to be operational.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because from my sort of side, when we're talking with CFOs all the time, that's kind of the intel we're getting from them, is especially since it's amazing COVID, like the start of 2020, we're in 2025, and there hasn't been that light at the end of the tunnel. In fact, it continues to sort of double down, and we're seeing businesses that are just cautious. I would say is the word we see them. The feeling we get the most, it's not panic, it's just cautious, and there's a lot of moving parts out there. And so I see exactly what you're saying as being able to connect finance, which is the foundation of every business. Um, but this increasing sort of automation and like you said, AI is starting to help more and more. Some places causing problems, but it's helping more and more. Um, we see that, we know that. But that actually it's amazing because it actually frees up the CFO, it frees up the finance team to say, I actually have time to stop and look at this and see what the data means instead of just getting the data together.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the goal, right? Finances, right? As I joke, and I'll use FP&A since that's my experience. I saw something once. Uh, how would you describe an FP&A professional's job? And it was they spend 80% of their time cleaning data and 20% complaining about the data they have to clean.
Sounds about right, yeah.
And I'm
Yeah.
sure you hear that from CFOs
Mhm.
and our date. We spend so much time trying to make sure we understand the data that we don't get any time to really dig in and gain those insights and
Yeah.
give the influence the business to make better decisions. We're just always kind of behind the eight ball, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah, and and when we see, it's like that final step after that is the CFOs we see, they stop and they look and they go, "I see this, I know what we need to do. I need the CEO to see what I'm seeing." And they have to get to that communication side, and it's a shame that sometimes it's 90 or you said like 80%, 90% of the time is just trying to get to the point where they have the story to talk to the CFO or the
Mhm.
CEO. Um, so it's the kind of new technologies combined with all of these outside pressures seem to be kind of like, creating opportunity for businesses in some way to have a better idea where they're headed, but
Correct.
it's a tricky time.
Well, and it's creating a great opportunity for finance to kind of lead out, to have that seat at the table and to play a bigger role, right?
Yeah,
There's the perception that finance has always been in the CFO. It's all about controllership, it's all about risk. They're just there to cut costs. And there are people that's the case, and there are many
yeah,
roles. You know, Finance, I think, has always had people who are strategic and the best were commercially driven. But now
mhm,
it's just kind of that expectation. If you want to be good, I mean, I ask every single week people questions. If you want to be a better business partner, what do you need to do? If you want, what's your number one soft and technical skill? My podcast,
mhm,
and you hear operations and curiosity, and it's never be better at building that three statement model. Be better
yeah,
at Excel. If I ask what the number one technical skill is, they'll say Excel or financial modeling. But when I ask about great FP&A, it's always tied to the business
yeah,
and, the relationships. And as the role expands, that makes it hard because you got to have more and more relationships. You have more and more data, more and more things you understand. And that's why you're seeing CFO roles. They tend to be some of the shortest. I think it's the shortest in C level. They've
yeah.
said how long they're staying, and it's getting shorter. They're leaving roles quicker because I think they're asked to do so much that you're seeing burnout is real. I mean, I know I dealt with it in FP&A where there's times like, I don't know how much longer I can do this.
Yeah, yeah, well, and I can see that just again for talking from CFOs, I tell you, sometimes we have CFOs come in the door and they're just almost like, I've known them for 30 seconds and they're just like, "This is a problem I've got." It's like a fire hose coming out and they're struggling and they're generally struggling with the data and trying to get it
Mhm.
into a usable form that they can, like you said, 80% of their time putting together data, that's a tough role to take when it's ultimately the responsibilities to give those insights, right? And,
And
um,
that's what they
yeah,
wanna be doing.
yeah,
Very few people in finance, there are exceptions, wanna spend the majority of their time being a data jockey,
yeah,
especially at the senior levels, right?
yes, yeah,
Director, VP, CFO. I don't know any CFO that goes into a role and goes, "I wanna spend all my time with the data." They wanna understand the data, but cleaning it, no, that's not what they wanna be doing. And if
yeah.
it is, they're probably not gonna have the job very long.
Yeah, exactly. It's especially, with, the sort of the volatility you see now. Answers mean more, and insights mean more, I think, than they used to. And so this role of finance, like we were talking a little bit about it, it's evolving in a number of ways. What else are you kind of seeing and how it's sort of changing and how the increasingly big push towards operations?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think you're seeing one, you're seeing technology and AI,
Mhm,
right? And we're all trying to figure out how we can really use that. You're seeing finance more and more owning data. And often that's a shared ownership, right? Because they're not gonna be the technical ones figuring out what database should we use and,
yeah,
what's our data governance policy and all those type of things. But the master data and making sure we're aligned on all the metrics and I had a role, my last role before I started my own business, I was director of was it finance, sales operations, and analytics. I didn't report to a single person. Or,
mhm,
I mean, I didn't have a single person under me. I reported to the VP of FP&A, and my role was all about helping the company make the transition to SaaS and figure out what we need to do with reports and data and
mm,
changes in operation. It was just a connector role,
yep,
but it was under FP&A. And so, that's I think you're seeing more and more of that recognition that FP&A and the CFO, outside of the CEO, are really the only roles in the company that get to see the entire business.
mhm,
For to kinda, think of that control tower, right? They see the entire sky. And so
yeah,
they bring a different perspective. And so I think we're really, seeing people realizing that.
yeah, and it feels like it's that time where, there's so much change, like, there's so much change in the pace of change, as we've all seen over especially the last 5 years, is more in the last 5 years than probably the last 20 before it. And now with the introduction of AI and how it's being adopted, there's gonna be even more change. But I think I think you probably are on the same page as me that there's gonna be a few hiccups, as that is adopted because as we're finding and as we're talking with CFOs every day, there's not a real high level of trust yet, and there's a
Yep.
reason for that because sometimes it's not very trustworthy.
The technology can hallucinate. And then also there's an aspect where everybody wants to get value out of AI,
Yeah.
but what's the quality of your data? Garbage in, garbage out. AI
Yes.
doesn't fix the garbage in and of itself. For the things AI can do to help you cleanse your data, sure. But there still needs to be a cleansing process. You can't just, "Hey, here's my data, figure it out."
Yeah.
When you spend 6 hours cleaning it before you could get any analysis, and they don't know the rules you use to clean it because 'cause they're usually sometimes, one-offs and all kinds of things, at least at first.
Yeah. Yeah, and you can see the I guess almost like specialization of AI, and it is heading in the right direction really quite
Mhm.
rapidly.
Yep.
It's still there's still a lot of pain points that we hear about all the time, and so it's coming, but it's almost like in one way it's like it's coming too fast because you know. Can we implement it properly and make sure that it's trustworthy and it's doing it right? And in a way, it's coming too slow because the CFO has all of this on their shoulders and they need to be able to have clean, better data and move right to insights. And it feels like, to me, it feels like it's in this little really uncomfortable time of change, right?
It's a difficult time for everybody to figure it out. What software do I use? And, we don't really have holistic workflows yet. Yes,
Mhm.
everybody says they have their agents, and many of them are just kind of procedure rules and different things, but they're not. It's not really there across the company.
No. Yeah.
And then you add to that, like we talked about, the pace of change. Look at the last month. We just had bombings in the Middle East. We've had tariffs back and forth.
Mhm.
This year we've had dictators overthrown in multiple countries. Just a ton of change politically, economically, regulatory
Mhm.
that just keeps driving. Even just look, interest rates and the U.S. Treasury getting downgraded again. I
Yeah.
think every major agency has downgraded them one. All those things just put more and more pressure, more risk, more change that a CFO is trying to make sure they manage financially.
Yes. Yeah. And, like, I just sort of want to sort of bring this up now. When do you think it will start, or do you see something on the horizon where it'll start to sort of settle down and businesses will get a little bit of more of that confidence back, and they won't be like almost like frozen, just wait. Everyone's in a holding pattern right now.
Um, I I think it's going to take a while. I think we have some leaders that are hard to predict. And it doesn't matter whether you agree with the leaders or not, but the more you have that, that creates more uncertainty,
Mhm.
which puts more people on hold. And
Yes.
I think the more you have of people being unpredictable, the longer it's going to take to get to that certainty. So I'm not sure the answer.
Yeah.
We need some stability from a political, a government perspective, I think, from a stability. There's been a lot of instability in that area in my mind over the last year.
Yes. Yeah, and the sense I get is, like, right now, it's like you said, this increasingly, important role in operations is because it's like we have to gotta run tight, we gotta run lean, we gotta be cautious,
Mhm.
and growth is not on a lot of businesses' radar right now,
Yeah, and growth at any cost is long out the window now. It's
long
like,
gone.
you gotta grow efficiently. If you can't grow efficiently, then shut down.
That's exactly it. It's gotta be. I actually had a just a little side note here, 'cause I actually had an invitation to be on a podcast, earlier today, and they were looking for, um, technology businesses that were rapidly scaling tech teams, and I thought, "I'm not sure you're gonna find one." Like, because same thing in our industry, it's like you're cautious
OpenAI is
and you're
still scaling pretty fast, but I know what you mean. There's not a lot.
yeah, and also the part of the question is, well, AI is actually starting to help and is starting to take on an increasing role. Still got to be cautious and everything else.
Yeah.
So just blindly scaling team is just not as common right now, right?
I'll give a prime example. There was an FP&A software tool just raised $60 million as part of a Series B this year. And over the last year, without growing their team, they scaled revenue 300%. Still had under 100 employees.
Yeah.
And so that's an example of running efficient, finding ways to use AI, get more
Yes.
lean in your processes
Yeah.
and grow. And with that type of cash, if you're that efficient, you can do a lot more on the product and the marketing efficiently versus what we saw for a long time. Let's go through I don't want to just say a big party, but let's be a little fiscally irresponsible. We raised a bunch of money.
Yeah. And bodies, just indiscriminately adding
Yeah,
bodies.
just double the staff. We'll just throw bodies
Yeah.
at it. If we had more salespeople, we'll have more sales.
Yeah. And
Maybe.
we saw
I've
that
seen it not
didn't
work. I was at a company where we had a guy who just wanted to add more and more sales. And we're like, yeah, you're getting 5% increase, 5% down, 10 up. We're not seeing anything consistent and our
yeah.
costs are up 40%. Like this
Yes.
isn't sustainable.
Yes. It was, I think, fortunately, in a lot of ways, that model, um, is dead for now. We'll see if it rears its ugly head again. But it is,
Just
you
like
know,
everything, history repeats itself. It's a question
history.
of
Yeah.
whether we'll be around to see it or not.
Yeah. And it's interesting, actually, when you make that connection, it's like that's probably why a lot of these businesses, there's been that culture shift in investment and inside businesses, especially innovation businesses. And there's probably that's why it's like, okay, it's we have to connect the CFO to the operations because it was like total disconnect, and it was often like a chief revenue officer that's like, well, let's just go, right? Or and it's changed a bit, and it necessarily has had to change. So what? How do you sort of foresee this increasing change? How do what do you see coming down the road? How do CFOs better prepare to be able to take on a role that's probably going to be pushed on their shoulders, right?
Well, I think it starts with one, finance professionals. I think it's really valuable to have had an operational role somewhere along in your career. I was fortunate enough to start. I actually wouldn't say necessarily operations, but I did some report writing. I supported our sales teams, a little bit of an operations role there before I went into FP&A. Before I worked in logistics. I think that's one thing. I think you're going to continue to see, which we've seen an increase. More and more CFOs are going to have very strong FP&A experience. Historically, really strong controller. And not to
Mm,
say controllers can't make great CFOs, and there's still plenty of them. But I've seen more and more people predicting, and Jack McCulloch, who runs CFO Leadership Council, said the majority of CFOs are going to come from FP&A. And I think he said by 2026 was his prediction.
mhm,
And we've seen a substantial increase in that. And those are more operationally focused roles. So I think CFOs need to strategically think, how do I prepare myself to really understand the whole business, to be a lot more operationally focused?
mhm.
And then make sure you have a plan for the areas you're not strong. Like, okay, if you're not really strong in treasury, how are you going to address that? If you don't have a strong of the accounting experience, how are you going to address that? And I think that's what really needs to happen is finance people need to be thinking about those type of things. Because, most finance professionals that want to move up in their career and are career motivated, good majority of them want to be a CFO at some point, right? Which
Mhm.
isn't surprising, pretty common. And if they want to, I think they need to start thinking more and more about those type of things.
Yeah, and I think, like, you kinda hit the nail on the head. Probably the first thing they can do is, "Let's get out of the office here and start learning about the business I'm in right now,"
Mhm.
and understanding, and I think that's maybe where some of those connections happen, right? Talking with other people, getting some information from these other departments, from people in there, and figuring out how do all these different making connections. How do these different things that don't necessarily connect? Because that's one thing I also think is going to be such a people task going forward is AI is good at going like, here's a bucket of data, show me some of this. It's not very good at making weird connections from here to here and going, there's something in like you were in logistics or something that's in like inventory or just something about the appetite of the market. How does that connect? And I think that's where people are really good at making these weird connections, and that's where they can really help a business move forward.
Mhm. I'd agree with that.
So, I wanted to ask you a little bit about like what are you doing today, and what like how can people get hold of you, and if they want to talk with you about some of the stuff.
Yeah, I'm doing a little too much these days. Isn't that how it works when you're a founder?
Always, always.
I figured you would relate. So, start with I have 3 podcasts that I do today. I have FP&A tomorrow,
Mhm.
obviously all about financial planning and analysis. Shock, right? With the FP&A guy at. Then I have one called Financial Modelers Corner, a little more technical. We talk to financial modelers, but we talk a lot about the soft skill side of it as well. I do that every week. And then I have one I host with a gentleman by the name of Glenn Hopper, global expert in AI. We do AI and technology called Future Finance and where
Hmm.
we're going. So that's one thing. You can find me on Spotify, YouTube, Apple, wherever. In addition to that, I do training. I've worked with a
Hmm.
lot of large companies. I have courses on my website. People can reach out to me about corporate training. And we customize things for your company. We have quite a few different offerings: finance, Excel, data visualization, all kinds of different courses. And then, in addition to that, one area I've been focusing a lot on is certifications.
Hmm.
There's a lot of them that come up in FP&A. I've done multiple of them. I've know all the major ones out there. I develop course content for many of them. And so now I'm starting to help people and share a lot about it. How do you decide, what FP&A certificate is right for
Hmm.
you? So if people go to my website, thefpnaguy.com, they'll see that. And so, they can find me on my website, on LinkedIn, and they can also join my community. I have a free community called the FPAhub.com.
All right, terrific. So, and I'll get all that down in the show notes so everyone can see that. Thanks for being on the show, Paul. I really appreciate it. And all of you out there, again, if you're a CFO and you're stuck in spreadsheets, your team is dealing with especially cash flow, especially scenario modeling, trying to figure out where the business is going, please come and visit us at dryrun.com. We're going to get you out of those spreadsheets, save you a ton of time, and give you visuals that the management team can understand at a glance. So, thanks again, Paul. I really appreciate it.